The road north. Clara Jensen had never known grief to feel so raw. Everything seemed too loud, from the scrape of a chair across the cabin floor, the hiss of wind pressing against the walls, even the steady ticking of the small clock on the shelf above her head. She stood at the table with both hands wrapped around a chipped blue cup, though the coffee inside had gone cold long ago. Across from her, Ingrid Jensen sat with her black shawl pulled close around her shoulders, her silver hair braided and pinned as neatly as if Sunday company might arrive at any moment. But no company would come today. Most of the neighbors had already been. They had brought bread, ham, jars of preserves, and quiet words spoken in the doorway. They had stood near the grave on the rise behind the cabin while Pastor Lund read from the Psalms, and the wind carried his words thinly across the snow. Now only silence remained. Clara's eyes drifted toward the small bed in the corner, carefully made and empty. Peter had been gone 3 days. Only 3 days. And already the world had changed so completely that she hardly knew where to put her hands, where to rest her eyes, how to breathe without feeling as though something essential had been torn away. Ingrid followed her gaze. "My son was always poor at keeping still," she said softly, "even as a boy. If there was wood to split, he split it. If there was a fence down, he fixed it. If there was a horse gone lame, he sat beside it as though his waiting might heal the beast." Clara's fingers tightened around the cup. He did not know what to do with sickness. No. Ingrid's face folded in on itself for one brief moment. He fought it as though fever could be argued with. Clara closed her eyes. She had sat beside him through the long nights, changing warm onion poultices, spooning broth between lips that barely opened and whispering prayers until the words ran together. There was no doctor within a day's journey, and the bitter wagon ride through snow and cold would have been more than Peter could bear. She had watched the strong hands that once guided horses and lifted sacks of seed grow thin and restless against the quilt. At the end, Peter had come out of the fever's delirium long enough to look past her toward his mother. "Take care of Ma," he had whispered. Clara had promised before she understood what the promise would cost. Outside, the wind rose and sent loose snow brushing against the door. Ingrid pushed herself to standing. "I will go to Willow Creek." Clara looked up sharply. "What?" "My brother's girl married a man near there. It is further north, but there is a church and a settlement. I had a letter last spring." Ingrid reached for the shelf where an envelope sat, tucked behind the family Bible. "They said there would always be a place for kin." Clara stared at her. "Willow Creek? That is nearly 2 days by wagon in fair weather." "Then it will take longer in poor weather." "You cannot go alone." Ingrid turned, and for the first time since the burial, Clara saw something like decision in her eyes. "I cannot stay here." The words settled between them. Clara knew it was true. The cabin stood on land Peter had rented, not owned. The little money they had saved was nearly gone. The harsh winter had taken what the failed wheat crop had not. Even the horse would likely need to be sold before spring unless a way could be found to feed it. Clara was 26 years old, a widow, and possessed of no land, no child, and no clear place in the world. Her own parents were in Iowa. Her father's last letter had said she could come home if she needed to. Clara knew what that meant. There would be a place at the table, a narrow bed in the sewing room, and kindness enough. But there would also be pity. There would be the silent understanding that she had left as a bride and returned as a burden. Ingrid crossed to the trunk at the foot of her bed and rested one hand upon it. "You should go home, Clara." The words were gentle. They struck harder for being so. Clara looked at her mother-in-law. Ingrid's shoulders were thinner than they had been a year ago. Her hands, twisted with age and hard work, rested on the trunk as though she needed it to stay upright. "Peter asked me to take care of you. He was dying. A man says many things when he is leaving. He said what mattered." Ingrid's mouth trembled. "You are young. I am not a girl. You could marry again." Clara flinched before she could stop herself. Ingrid saw it and looked away. "I did not mean tomorrow," she said. "Only that there may be a life yet for you. Your mother and father would welcome you. Your brothers would see that you had what you needed. In Iowa, there is family." "There is family here." Ingrid's eyes filled. Clara set down the cup and crossed the room. She knelt before the older woman and took both of her hands. "I will go with you." "No." "Yes." "No, Clara." Ingrid's voice broke. "I have buried my husband and now my son. I will not bury your future, too." Clara swallowed hard. For a moment, she could not speak. The cabin blurred, and she bowed her head over Ingrid's hands. Then, quietly, she said, "Your people will be my people." Ingrid drew in a sharp breath. Clara lifted her face. "Where you go, I will go. If Willow Creek is where you must go, then that is where I will go. Do not say such things because you are lonely." "I am lonely." Clara's voice steadied. "But I am not confused." Ingrid stared at her, tears slipping silently down the fine lines of her cheeks. Clara held her hands a little tighter. "Peter gave me a family when I married him. I will not lay that family down because the road has grown hard." For a long while, neither of them moved. Then Ingrid bent forward and pressed her forehead to Clara's. "My brave girl," she whispered. Clara did not feel brave. She felt hollowed out. She felt as though some part of her had been left in the frozen ground behind the cabin. But beneath the grief, small and stubborn, was the memory of her promise. Take care of Ma. She would, somehow. By afternoon, the decision had become work, and work was easier than sorrow. Clara wrapped dishes in old cloth and placed them in a crate. Ingrid sorted bedding, setting aside what must be kept and what could be sold. The neighbors had left more food than the two women could carry, so Clara packed what would travel well and made a list of what might be given away before they left. Each object seemed to ask a question. Peter's boots, his wool coat, the carved wooden horse he'd made during their first winter, laughing when Clara told him it looked more like a mule. She placed the little horse in the bottom of her satchel. Ingrid saw, but said nothing. Near sundown, a knock sounded at the door. Clara stiffened. Ingrid wiped her eyes with the corner of her apron and called, "Come." The door opened, bringing with it a swirl of cold air and Pastor Lund's broad frame. His hat was dusted with snow, and his beard held small beads of ice. "I will not stay," he said, stepping inside and closing the door quickly behind him. "I only came to see how you are faring." Clara almost smiled. "We are packing." His eyebrows lifted. "Ingrid is going to Willow Creek," Clara said. "I am going with her." The pastor looked from one woman to the other. His expression softened, but he did not argue. Clara was grateful for that. "There is a freight wagon leaving for Fergus Falls the day after tomorrow," he said. "I heard at the mill this morning. The driver may be willing to take passengers part of the way if there is room." Ingrid's hand went to the back of a chair. That would save the horse, Clara said. It may. Pastor Lund reached into his coat and withdrew a folded paper. Also, Mrs. Sorensen asked me to bring this. Clara took the paper. Inside were 3 coins and a note written in careful script for the journey from those who loved Peter. Clara pressed her lips together. Ingrid turned toward the stove, but not before Clara saw her face crumple. The pastor cleared his throat. There is no shame in receiving kindness. Clara nodded because she could not speak. He looked around the small cabin, his gaze pausing on the crates, the folded quilts, the boots by the bed. Peter was a good man. Yes, Clara whispered, and so was his father before him. Pastor Lund's eyes rested on Ingrid. The Lord does not forget a faithful house. Ingrid gave a small nod. After he left, Clara stood by the door and watched his lantern bob through the blue dusk until it disappeared beyond the trees. Snow had begun to fall again, not heavily, just enough to soften the hard edges of the yard and cover the tracks leading to the grave. Behind her, Ingrid began folding Peter's coat. Clara turned. We should sell that. Ingrid held it against her chest. Yes, she said. Tomorrow. But tomorrow, when Clara woke before dawn, the coat was folded over the back of her own chair. A note lay upon it. You will need warmth on the road. Clara touched the rough wool and finally wept. Not the silent tears she had allowed herself in corners. Not the careful tears of a woman trying not to frighten the one who grieved beside her. She wept as though the weather inside her had broken. Ingrid came to her and held her the way a mother holds a child, with one hand cupped around the back of her head. It is a hard road, Ingrid whispered. Clara clung to her. Yes, but not an empty one. Outside, morning came pale and cold across the Minnesota fields. By the second day, the cabin no longer looked like a home. It looked like a place already remembering them. The table had been sold to the miller's wife. The cow had gone to the Hansens. The horse and wagon were purchased by a neighbor who promised to carry their trunks to the freight road before keeping them. Peter's tools went last. Clara stood by while Mr. Sorensen lifted the toolbox from the shed. He would want them used, Ingrid said. I know. But knowing did not make it easy. On the morning they left, the sky was clear and painfully blue. The snow shone so bright, Clara had to narrow her eyes against it. Their belongings fit into 2 trunks, 1 crate, and Clara's satchel. Before climbing onto the wagon, Ingrid walked to the rise behind the cabin. Clara followed at a distance. The grave was marked by a wooden cross Pastor Lund had made himself. Peter Jensen, beloved son and husband. Ingrid stood before it a long time. When Clara joined her, the older woman reached for her hand. I am leaving him, Ingrid said. Clara shook her head. No, we are carrying him with us. Ingrid looked at her. In what he taught us, Clara said, in what he loved, in the promises we keep. The wind moved across the field, lifting a thin veil of snow over the frozen ground. At last, Ingrid nodded. Together, they turned away. The freight wagon met them at the crossroads before noon. The driver was a wiry man named Mr. Bell, with sharp eyes and a kinder heart than his manner first suggested. He grumbled about trunks, weather, and women traveling in winter, but he shifted sacks of flour to make room. You'll have to sit tight, he said. I don't stop for every cold toe and sniffle. We will manage, Clara said. He gave her a sideways glance. Widow Jensen? Yes. His expression changed just enough to show he knew. News traveled faster than wagons. Sorry for your trouble, he muttered. "Thank you." Clara helped Ingrid climb up, then settled beside her beneath Peter's coat and one of the quilts. The wagon lurched forward. The cabin fell behind them. For the first mile, Clara did not look back. She kept her eyes on the road ahead, where the wagon wheels had cut dark lines through the packed snow. Then the road curved. She turned. The cabin stood small against the white field, smoke no longer rising from its chimney. Beyond it, on the rise, the cross caught the morning light. Clara lifted one hand, not goodbye exactly. Something quieter, something unfinished. Then the trees hid the cabin from view. Ingrid sat very still beside her. After a while, her hand crept beneath the quilt and found Clara's. The road north was rough, rutted, and half-frozen. The wagon groaned beneath its load. Sometimes Mr. Bell sang to the horses in a voice that sounded more like scolding than music. Sometimes he fell silent for so long that Clara could hear only the creak of harness and the crunch of wheels. By late afternoon, the cold had worked through Clara's boots. Ingrid's face had gone pale with weariness. "Lean against me," Clara said. "I am too heavy." "You are not." Ingrid hesitated, then allowed her shoulder to rest against Clara's. The weight was slight. It steadied Clara more than it burdened her. As dusk gathered, they passed a farmhouse where lamplight glowed in the windows and children's faces appeared briefly behind the glass. Clara watched until the house vanished into the dark. Once, she had thought home was a place a person reached and kept. Now she wondered if home might also be something built slowly, out of mercy, bread, shared sorrow, and hands that refused to let go. Near nightfall, Mr. Bell drew the wagon into the yard of a small wayside inn. "We stop here," he called. No sense breaking a wheel in the dark. The innkeeper's wife took one look at Ingrid's gray face and ushered them inside without waiting for explanation. "You'll sit by the stove," she said. "Both of you." The room smelled of yeast bread, onions, wood smoke, and damp wool. A few travelers sat at rough tables. Someone had hung a sprig of evergreen over the mantel, though Christmas was still more than a week away. Clara helped Ingrid to a chair. The innkeeper's wife brought soup. "We have little money," Clara began. The woman set down 2 bowls. "Then you can wash dishes after supper." Clara stared at her. The woman's eyes warmed. "Eat first." It was the first hot meal Clara had tasted since before the funeral. She ate slowly at first, then with an appetite that surprised and embarrassed her. Ingrid managed half a bowl before color returned to her cheeks. After supper, Clara rolled up her sleeves and washed dishes in a back room while the innkeeper's wife dried. "You headed north?" the woman asked. "To Willow Creek." "Kin there?" "Some, not close." "Church folk?" "I believe so." "That helps." Clara glanced at her. The woman stacked a plate on the shelf. "Out here, kin is a blessing, but good neighbors can keep a person alive until kin arrives." Clara thought of the coins in her pocket, the wagon seat made ready, the soup placed before them. "Yes," she said softly, "I am learning that." Later, in the small room they shared beneath the eaves, Ingrid slept almost at once. Clara did not. She lay under a quilt that smelled faintly of lavender and stared into the darkness. The wind pressed against the inn walls. Somewhere below, a man laughed quietly. A door opened and closed. Horses shifted in the stable. Clara reached beneath the folded blanket at her side and found the carved wooden horse in her satchel. Her fingers closed around it. "Lord," she whispered, then stopped. There were too many prayers inside her, and none would come in order, so she said the only one she could manage. "Help us." The small room seemed to hold the words, not answer them, only hold them. For tonight, that was enough. By morning, the sky had clouded over again. Mr. Bell wanted to leave before sunrise. Clara and Ingrid climbed into the wagon while the world was still blue with cold. The innkeeper's wife pressed 2 biscuits into Clara's hand. "For the road." Clara thanked her. The woman waved it away. "When you get settled, do the same for someone else." The words stayed with Clara through the long morning. Do the same for someone else. The farther north they traveled, the more the land opened. Bare fields stretched wide beneath a low gray sky. Here and there, smoke rose from sod houses or cabins tucked against windbreaks of trees. Frozen ponds lay flat among tall weeds. Crows lifted from fence posts as the wagon passed. Shortly after noon, Mr. Bell pointed with his whip. "Willow Creek Road." Clara leaned forward. At first, she saw only more snow, more fields, more sky. Then, beyond a line of leafless cottonwoods, buildings appeared. A church steeple, a cluster of cabins, a general store with a false front, a blacksmith shop, and beyond them, fields lying still beneath winter, waiting for spring. Ingrid drew in a breath. "Willow Creek," she said. Clara looked at the small settlement and felt fear rise so suddenly she almost could not breathe. They knew no one here, not truly. They had no home here, no charé work, no promise beyond a letter written months ago by kin who might or might not have room when they arrived. The wagon rolled closer. A bell rang somewhere in the settlement, clear and bright across the cold air. At the sound, the door of the general store opened. A woman stepped out, then shaded her eyes. 2 children ran past her into the street. A man came from the blacksmith shop, wiping his hands on a cloth. People turned to look. Clara sat straighter. Beside her, Ingrid's hand found hers again. This time, Clara held on first. Whatever waited in Willow Creek, they would face it together. The wagon crossed the narrow bridge over the frozen creek and entered the town.